Haynes said, "If you don't like my mom moving in, leave." One phone call cost him his home. I thought my fiancé was giving me an ultimatum. He had no idea the house had never legally been his. That single phone call didn't just end our engagement, it exposed years of quiet manipulation, destroyed his family's plans, and changed both of our lives forever. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 28 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I was only 8 months away from marrying the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Ethan Carter was 32, charming, confident, and remarkably skilled at making irresponsibility look like trust. We had been together for 3 years and engaged for 8 months. 14 months earlier, we moved into a comfortable 3-bedroom rental house with a small backyard and enough space for me to turn 1 bedroom into a home office. It felt like the beginning of the life we'd always talked about. Friends loved the place and often told us it suited us perfectly. Back then, I believed them. The house belonged to Robert Reynolds, the father of my best friend, Mia. He had known me since I was 12 and offered us the house at a rent far below market value. More accurately, he offered that deal to me. The lease was entirely in my name. I paid the security deposit and first month's rent, just over $4,200 from my own savings, then continued sending Robert the full rent every month after Ethan transferred me his share. Ethan never questioned any of it. "You're better with paperwork," he would say whenever I handed him something to read. At the time, I took it as a sign of trust. Looking back, it was simply easier for him to let me handle every responsibility while still behaving as though the important decisions belonged to him. His mother, Diane, had been part of our relationship from the very beginning. Weekly dinners at her apartment weren't invitations. They were obligations. If I was tired or had to work late, Ethan would remind me she'd already bought groceries and cancelling wasn't an option. Their Sunday phone calls often stretched for hours, leaving me sitting alone while our own plans quietly disappeared. Diane also had an opinion about everything. She criticised my hair, questioned my work schedule, rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking, and constantly found small ways to remind me she knew Ethan better than I ever could. Whenever I looked to him for support, he would laugh and shrug. "She can't help herself." That was Ethan's answer to almost everything. According to him, Diane couldn't help criticising, interfering, or calling in the middle of our dates, so I was expected to be the one who adjusted. I kept telling myself she'd eventually change, that marriage required patience, and that Ethan was worth the compromise. The truth was far less noble. I was afraid setting boundaries would make me look like the difficult one. 3 weeks ago, Ethan came home after visiting Diane while I was making dinner. He skipped his usual hello, set his keys on the counter, and watched me in silence until I finally asked what was wrong. "We need to talk." Something about the way he said it made me feel he'd already decided how the conversation would end. I explained that Diane's landlord had sold her building and every tenant had 60 days to leave. I felt genuinely sorry for her and asked whether she'd started looking for another apartment. Hal rubbed the edge of the counter before answering. "Actually, I already told her she could stay here." I stared at him. "You told her she could move in without asking me?" "She's my mother, Claire. She needs help." "I'm not arguing with that. I'm asking why you made the decision before talking to me." "I knew you'd turn it into a debate." "Because it should be one." He sighed impatiently. "We have 3 bedrooms. One is ours, one is my office, and the guest room is empty. 4 guests, not another permanent resident." I looked away, and that tiny hesitation told me more than his words ever could. "How long is temporary?" "I don't know. A month? Maybe. 2. Affordable housing is hard to find." I studied his face for a moment before asking the question neither of us wanted to hear. "Is your mom planning to live here permanently?" After a long pause, he finally admitted it. "She's getting older. She shouldn't be alone." The sauce simmered behind me, forgotten. "You already worked all of this out with her. She needs stability. You promised my home to your mother before you said a single word to me. Our home. Then why wasn't I part of the decision?" His expression hardened. "You're making this about control." "No, I'm making it about respect. She's family." I met his eyes. "So what am I supposed to be? Your future wife or just the person paying half the bills?" "That's not fair." "No, Ethan. What's unfair is deciding my office belongs to your mother and expecting me to smile about it. You can work from the living room." He said it so casually that it hurt more than if he'd raised his voice. My office wasn't just a spare room. I worked from home 3 days a week and had spent months turning it into a space where I could actually focus. None of that seemed to matter once Diane decided she wanted it. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said. "We need to slow down and talk about other options." "There aren't any," Ethan replied. "Mom's moving in next weekend." I stared at him. "You already picked a date?" "She has to start packing." You promised her my office, chose a move-in date, and never even asked me. I didn't think I needed to. I switched off the stove and faced him. That's exactly the problem. This is my house too. It's our home, which means decisions like this belong to both of us. My mother isn't some stranger. I never said she was, but telling me I have no choice isn't helping her. It's dismissing me. His expression hardened. Fine. If you can't accept my mom living here, maybe you should leave. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. What? I'm choosing my family. I was supposed to become your family. She was here before you, Claire. She'll still be here after you're gone. The room fell silent. In that moment, everything I'd excused over the past 3 years finally made sense. Ethan had never expected us to stand beside each other. He expected me to step aside whenever his mother wanted something. Okay, I said. He frowned. Okay, I'll leave. I waited for tears or an argument, but I gave him neither. Instead, I grabbed my laptop, texted Mia, I need to talk, it's urgent, and walked out. She called before I reached the driveway. Where are you? Outside the house. Stay there. I'm calling my dad. Less than a minute later, Robert Reynolds joined the call. After hearing what happened, he asked only one question. Does Ethan realize he isn't on the lease? I don't think he's ever read it. Robert sighed. Claire, you're the only legal tenant. Ethan is simply an approved occupant, and Diane has no right to move in without my permission. I already knew those facts, but hearing them out loud changed everything. Ethan had spent 14 months calling it our house, choosing furniture, inviting guests, and acting like he owned the place. I never corrected him because I wanted it to feel like ours. Legally, it never was. What do you want to do? Robert asked. It was the first time anyone had asked what I wanted instead of what Ethan or Diane needed. I looked back at the house. From the outside, it still looked warm and welcoming. Inside, the man I planned to marry had just told me I could be replaced. I want to terminate the lease. Robert didn't hesitate. Send me the request tonight. I'll waive the early termination fee, handle the notice properly, and when your lease ends, Ethan's right to stay ends with it. I looked at the house one last time. He still thinks I'm the one with nowhere to go. By tomorrow, Robert said quietly. He'll know otherwise. I packed a small bag and walked back inside. Ethan hadn't moved from the kitchen. You're really leaving? You told me to. I didn't mean tonight. You told me to leave, he sighed. Claire, don't turn one argument into a disaster. I zipped my bag and looked at him. This stopped being one argument the moment you made a life-changing decision without me. You told me your mother would still be here after I was gone. His jaw tightened. I was angry. No, Ethan, you were certain. I walked out without another word. At Mia's apartment, I sent Robert a formal request to terminate the lease. Less than an hour later, he replied, a request accepted, lease termination effective in 30 days, early termination fee waived. I stared at the email until Mia finally asked, how do you feel? Like I just destroyed my future. She shook her head. No, you stopped him from deciding it for you. I barely slept that night. A small part of me still hoped Ethan would wake up, realize what he'd done, and come looking for me with a real apology. Instead, I woke up to 7 missed calls and a stream of furious messages. What the hell is this? Did you seriously get us evicted? Call me. This is my house. Fix this. Robert had already delivered the notice. He still thinks it's his house, Mia said after reading the messages. Not for much longer. By the 5th call, I answered. What did you do? Ethan shouted. I terminated my lease. Our lease. No, Ethan, my lease. Silence. The agreement is in my name. I signed it, paid the deposit, and dealt directly with Robert. You were only listed as an approved occupant. I pay half the rent. You paid me. You never paid the landlord. I heard drawers opening on the other end before he spoke again. Where's the lease? Exactly where I always kept it. Another long silence. My name has to be on it. It is. Under approved occupant. That makes me a tenant. No, it means you had permission to live there while my lease was active. His breathing changed. You can't throw me out. I'm not throwing you out. I'm ending the lease attached to my name. Robert said I have 30 days. That's more time than you gave me when you told me to leave. I was angry. And you made yourself perfectly clear. After a long pause, he asked quietly, where am I supposed to go? For a moment, I almost answered. The old version of me wanted to solve his problems the way I always had. Then I remembered how easily he'd handed my office to his mother and told me she would still be there after I was gone. Ask your mother, I said. She's already making housing decisions for both of you. I ended the call. A few minutes later, Diane's messages started pouring in. You vindictive little witch. How dare you make my son homeless? You were never good enough for him. You'll regret humiliating this family. I saved every message. Robert had advised me to document everything, and by then I understood exactly why. Lauren called next. Then Diane tried 3 more times. I ignored them all. Around noon, Ethan's messages changed completely. Claire, please call me. We can work this out. Mum doesn't have to move in. I stared at those words for a long time. Less than 24 hours earlier, there had been no discussion, no compromise, and no room for my opinion. The only thing that had changed was that Ethan had finally realized the house he thought he controlled had never legally been his. Now that Ethan knew the house would disappear with me, Diane suddenly wasn't so eager to move in. That evening, Ethan showed up at Mia's apartment and pounded on the door. I know you're in there, Claire. We need to talk. Mia started toward the door, but Robert stopped her. I'll handle it. He opened it just enough to block the entrance. Ethan looked exhausted, his confidence replaced by desperation. This is between me and Claire. It became my business the moment you started making decisions about my property, Robert replied. Ethan spotted me standing near the kitchen. Claire, can we talk, please? No, I overreacted. You told me to leave. I was under pressure. From your mother. He nodded. She was scared. I was trying to help her. You decided helping her meant pushing me out of my own home. I didn't mean it that way. You said your mother was family and I wasn't. Hayne lowered his eyes. I said things I shouldn't have, because you thought there wouldn't be consequences. Hayne had no answer. I stepped closer. Yesterday your mother moving in was non-negotiable. Today she suddenly has other options. The only thing that changed is that you found out the house was never yours. I love you, he said quietly. Months earlier, those words would have changed everything. Now they sounded like one last attempt to stop me from leaving. I was going to marry you. And I was going to spend my life with you. Then come home. That stopped being my home the moment you told me to leave. I'll tell Mom she can't move in. You could have said that before giving her my office. His voice broke. I made a mistake. I looked at him and realized he still believed the mistake was losing the house, not ignoring me, making a permanent decision behind my back, or choosing his mother every time our interests conflicted. You have 30 days, I said. Use them wisely. Robert quietly closed the door. As Ethan's footsteps faded down the hallway, I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I mourned the future I'd spent 3 years building with someone who never believed I'd actually walk away. His apologies lasted less than a day. When they failed, the guilt trips began. Then the pressure, then the demands. Looking back, he wasn't trying to understand why I left. He was simply searching for another way to make me come back. The next morning, Diane called Robert. There has to be some misunderstanding, she began politely. My son has lived there for over a year. He has, Robert replied, as an approved occupant. Then transfer the lease to him. I'm not doing that. My son paid rent. He paid Claire. Claire paid me. That's just a technicality. No, Mrs. Carter. That's the contract. When she accused him of choosing my side, Robert didn't deny it. I've known Claire since she was 12. I trusted her enough to rent her my property, and I'm honoring the lease she signed. Diane kept arguing until Robert ended the call. The house is already being prepared for new tenants. This conversation is over. She called 3 more times before he warned her that any further contact would be documented as harassment. Meanwhile, Ethan abandoned anger and tried guilt instead. Every night brought another message. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about us. 3 years can't end like this. One text arrived at 2:13 a.m. I was going to marry you. I only wanted to help my mom. How can you throw everything away over that? I couldn't help shaking my head. Somehow, he'd rewritten the entire story. In his version, the problem wasn't that he'd erased me from a decision about our home. It was that I'd refused to accept it. I never replied. Every message from Ethan and every insult from Diane went into the same folder, complete with screenshots and timestamps. Robert had been right. When emotions take over, memories become arguments, but evidence doesn't. 3 days later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. I almost ignored it until a quiet voice said, Claire, it's Lauren. Please don't hang up. Ethan's older sister sounded nervous. I just want to understand what happened. I think you already know. I only know Ethan's version. I looked out the window before answering. Did he tell you he promised Diane our house before speaking to me? That he announced she was moving in permanently? That he told me to leave if I didn't like it? Silence followed each question. No, Lauren admitted. He also said his mother would still be there after I was gone. I don't think he meant that. He did. But he loves you. I've never doubted that. Love wasn't the problem. He believed he could make a life-changing decision without me. He was under a lot of stress. So was I. She sighed. He never thought you'd actually leave. I know. After a long pause, Lauren quietly admitted Ethan was staying at her apartment. I'm sorry he's hurting, I said. You don't sound angry anymore. I was. Then I realized staying angry meant staying connected to him. Now I'm just tired. She thanked me for answering before hanging up. The conversation stayed with me, not because it changed my mind, but because someone in Ethan's family had finally listened instead of making excuses. 2 weeks later, Robert insisted I bring witnesses when I returned for the rest of my belongings. I've handled enough rental disputes to know better, he said. Everything needs to be documented. He arrived with 2 trusted maintenance contractors, and together we drove to the house. The moment I stepped out of the car, it no longer felt like home. It felt like a place I used to know. Ethan opened the door. He looked exhausted, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for him. Then Diane appeared behind him. There she is, she said coldly. The woman who ruined my son's life. I'm here for my belongings. And you've already taken enough. Robert stepped forward. We're only here to complete the move out. Diane stepped aside with obvious reluctance. The first thing I noticed wasn't the living room, it was my office. The door stood open, boxes lined the walls. Diane's family photos had replaced my decorations, and her sewing basket sat beside my desk. Half my filing cabinet had already been shoved into a corner to make room for her things. She hadn't waited for the lease to end. In her mind, I'd already been erased. Ethan followed my gaze. Mom was just organizing. My office? You weren't using it. I've been gone less than 2 weeks. You said you weren't coming back. I said I wasn't coming back to live here. Diane walked in carrying another storage box and smiled. I figured I'd make good use of the space. You can work from the dining table. The room wasn't what hurt. It was how easily she'd imagined a future where I no longer existed. I'm taking my desk, I said. And the shelves, Robert added, making a note on his clipboard. I ignored Diane's sarcastic laugh and worked through the inventory I'd prepared the night before. Every item I packed, from my office equipment to the kitchen appliances, was matched against receipts stored on my phone. As we loaded another box, Ethan stopped beside the television. You're not taking that. I bought it. We picked it together. I paid for it. We were engaged. We were never married. Hein looked at me for a long moment. I thought everything was ours. So did I. Neither of us spoke again. Diane broke the silence. Look at her, stripping the house bare like a vulture. Robert didn't even look up. Everything leaving today belongs to Claire. I kept packing. Every insult only confirmed I'd made the right decision. When I returned to what had once been our bedroom, it barely felt familiar. My side of the closet was almost empty. The photos from my nightstand were gone, and as I opened the dresser for the last few things, I froze. My jewelry box was exactly where I'd left it. The lid was open. Inside, it was empty. A chill ran through me as I lifted the box. My grandmother's diamond earrings, my mother's necklace, my aunt's bracelet. Every sentimental piece I'd kept there was gone. I walked into the hallway. Ethan. I looked up. Where's my jewelry? Shock flashed across his face, followed almost instantly by guilt, then panic. Just as quickly, he forced his expression blank. What jewelry? I held up the empty box. The jewelry that was in here. I don't know. You do? I looked away. My grandmother's earrings, my mother's necklace, my aunt's bracelet, every piece is missing. I haven't touched them. His answer came too quickly. After 3 years together, I knew exactly how he sounded when he was lying. Diane appeared in the doorway. What's going on? My jewelry is missing. She barely looked inside the box. Maybe you packed it already. I haven't touched this dresser. Then maybe you misplaced it. My grandmother's earrings aren't something I misplace. She shrugged. Things disappear. They disappeared after I left. A faint smile crossed her face. Funny how that happens. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Did you take them? I don't know what you're talking about. You've been moving your things into my office. You've been through this room. I've been cleaning. And opening drawers that weren't yours. She laughed. You certainly think highly of yourself. By then, Robert had stepped into the room. What's missing? I listed each piece while he wrote everything down. When he finished, he looked directly at Ethan. Do you know where they are? Ethan hesitated. Oh, no. Robert watched him for a moment before taking out his phone. What are you doing? Ethan asked. I'm reporting a theft. The color drained from Ethan's face. Wait, he said, taking a step forward. This doesn't have to go that far. It already has. Robert calmly began dialing the police while I kept my eyes on Ethan. If this is all a misunderstanding, I said, tell me where my jewelry is. He rubbed both hands across his face, searching for an answer that never came. Claire, where is it? His shoulders sagged. Mom took it. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. You knew? They were only keeping it safe. I stared at him, stunned. Safe from who? From you? Before he could say anything else, Diane stepped between us. I told Ethan to let me hold onto it. I didn't steal anything. You took family heirlooms that weren't yours, hid them, and expected me to believe that wasn't theft. I was going to return them. When? She hesitated just long enough to answer the question for me. When everything calmed down. I shook my head. No, you wanted me to panic. You wanted me to know what it felt like to lose something that mattered. She didn't deny it. Robert lowered his phone just enough to look at her. Mrs. Carter, you've admitted taking someone else's property without permission. The officers are already on their way. For the first time, Diane looked genuinely frightened. Tell him to cancel, she whispered to Ethan. I can't. Robert's expression never changed. If you intended to return the jewelry, then do it now. The room fell silent until Ethan finally snapped. Mom, give it back. Without another word, Diane disappeared into my former office and returned carrying a small canvas bag. Inside were my grandmother's earrings, my mother's necklace, my aunt's bracelet, and every other piece exactly where it should have been. I checked each one carefully before I finally allowed myself to breathe again. When the officers arrived, Robert explained what had happened. I confirmed the jewelry had been recovered, and Diane insisted she'd only been holding it temporarily. One officer simply asked why she hadn't returned it sooner. She couldn't answer. Because everything had been recovered and we had recently shared the home, they explained that criminal charges would be difficult to pursue, but an incident report would be filed. That was enough. The report wasn't about recovering jewelry anymore. It documented exactly how far Diane had been willing to go to punish me. After the officers left, I carried my last boxes to the moving truck. Ethan followed me outside, looking nothing like the man who had confidently ordered me to leave 2 weeks earlier. Claire, please, he said quietly. I'll find Mom another apartment. I'll pay for it if I have to. We'll rent somewhere else. We can start over. I looked at him for a long moment. Would you be saying any of this if you still believed that house belonged to you? He opened his mouth but couldn't answer. I was angry. You've used that excuse since the day I left. I didn't mean what I said. I think you did. The difference is that you never expected me to believe you. I looked down at this driveway. I love you. I know, but love wasn't what broke us. I took a slow breath before continuing. You promised my home to someone else, dismissed every opinion I had, told me to leave, and made it clear your mother would always come first. Then, when she hid my family's jewelry, your instinct wasn't to protect me, it was to protect her. He stood there in silence because there was nothing left to defend. I hope you used those 30 days to figure out what really cost you this relationship. Then I got into the truck and closed the door behind me. He lowered his head. I was trying to protect her. I know. Those 2 words seemed to hit him harder than anything else I could have said. You've always protected her, I continued. I just refused to stay in a relationship where I would always come second. I handed Robert my key, got into my car, and drove away without looking back. In the mirror, Ethan stood frozen in the driveway while Diane watched silently from the porch. Neither of them tried to stop me again. The rest of the notice period passed quickly. When it ended, Robert changed the locks that afternoon, and 2 days later a young couple expecting their first child moved into the house. I happened to drive by once a few weeks later. The porch had new flowers, a different porch swing, and a small wreath on the front door. It no longer looked like the place where my engagement had fallen apart. It looked like the beginning of someone else's future, and for the first time, I realized mine was somewhere else. Lauren later told me Ethan and Diane had rented a small 2-bedroom apartment nearly 40 minutes away. Without my income, every bill suddenly mattered, and the place was far smaller than the home they'd fought so hard to keep. Diane complained constantly about the neighborhood, the kitchen, and the lack of space, insisting that if Ethan had handled things differently, they'd still be living in the house. So it's still my fault? I asked. According to Mom, yes, Lauren said with an exhausted laugh. But Ethan doesn't argue with you anymore. These days he's the one listening to every complaint. Apparently, she criticized everything he did, from buying the wrong coffee to folding towels incorrectly. For years, I'd absorbed those comments while Ethan dismissed them with, she can't help herself. Now there was no one left to stand between them, and for the first time in his life, he had become the target instead of the spectator. A few days later, Lauren told me Ethan had suggested helping Diane find a senior apartment closer to her friends. She refused immediately. I sacrificed everything for you. I'm not going anywhere. The words stayed with me because I'd heard something almost identical before. My mother was here before you. She'll still be here after you. Now Ethan was discovering what that promise actually meant. As mutual friends learned what had really happened, Ethan's version of the story unraveled on its own. At first, he claimed I'd overreacted and terminated the lease after one argument. But the moment people learned the lease had always been in my name, that he'd told me to leave first, and that Diane had hidden my family jewelry, the conversation usually ended there. I never defended myself. I didn't have to. The facts spoke more clearly than I ever could. One afternoon, Mia showed me a message from an old college friend. "I can't believe Diane actually took your grandmother's earrings. You seriously dodged a bullet." I smiled, but it also made me think. 3 years together couldn't be erased overnight. I still remembered the man who brought me coffee during stressful workdays, danced with me barefoot in the kitchen, and stayed awake all night helping me finish presentations. Those memories were real. So were the others. The day he promised my home to someone else. The moment he told me to leave. The silence when his mother admitted taking my family's jewelry. Eventually, I understood something I'd spent weeks resisting. Good memories don't cancel repeated disrespect. They simply make it harder to walk away. About a month after the breakup, I mailed Ethan's engagement ring back by certified mail. 3 days later, a single message appeared on my phone. "The package received. Thank you." That was all. No apology. No acknowledgement of how everything had unraveled. Just 3 detached words from a man who had always believed I'd eventually give in. Meanwhile, Diane continued blaming me whenever she could, but her story fell apart every time someone asked the obvious questions. Was the lease in Ethan's name? No. Did he tell Claire to leave first? Yes. So she left and took her lease with her. Exactly. Even Diane couldn't argue with that. Not long afterward, Lauren called again. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I believed Ethan at first. I thought this was just another couple's argument. It wasn't. I know that now. I should have listened before choosing sides." The peace I found had nothing to do with Ethan admitting he was wrong. It came from realizing I no longer needed that apology to move forward. He had chosen his path, and for the first time in a long while, I was free to choose mine. A week later, I signed the lease for my own apartment. When the property manager asked whether anyone else would be living with me, I glanced at the blank line on the form and couldn't help thinking about the last lease Ethan had barely bothered to read before telling me to sign it. This time I smiled. No, just me. Walking back to my car with the keys in my hand, I expected excitement. What I felt instead was quieter than that. Relief. I thought that chapter of my life was finally over until a message from Lauren appeared on my phone. Ethan wanted to know if I would meet him because there were still things he needed to say. I read the message, locked my phone, and slipped it back into my pocket. Some conversations arrived too late to change anything. Moving day came the following Saturday. My new apartment was smaller, and all I had was a rented van, a few boxes, and Mia helping me carry them upstairs. Yet the moment everything was inside, the place already felt different. "It isn't much," Mia said. "No," I replied, looking around. "But it's peaceful." After she left, I stood alone in the quiet apartment. No one criticized where I put the furniture, opened my cabinets without asking, or made decisions about my home before speaking to me. For the first time in months, silence felt comforting instead of lonely. As I unpacked over the next few days, I realized I wasn't just furnishing an apartment. I was rebuilding my confidence. For weeks, I convinced myself the relationship ended because Ethan chose his mother. Eventually, I understood the truth was more complicated. If Diane had genuinely needed temporary help and Ethan had included me in the decision, we probably would have found a solution together. What destroyed us wasn't his desire to help his mother. It was his belief that my opinion mattered less than his own. He made the decision alone, informed me afterward, and expected me to accept it. Everything that followed grew from that single choice. Several weeks passed before I heard from Lauren again. This time there was no long apology from Ethan, only a simple question. Would I be willing to meet him? Months earlier, I would have said yes without hesitation. Instead, I found myself asking what was really left between us. By then, there wasn't much left to save. The trust was gone, respect had disappeared, and without those two things, love alone wasn't enough anymore. So I sent one last message. "I hope you both find the peace you're looking for. I wish you well." A few minutes later, his reply appeared. "I'm sorry." 3 years together, an engagement, and a future we'd planned together had been reduced to 2 words. I read them once, then put my phone away. I didn't ignore the apology out of anger. I simply no longer needed it. About a month later, Lauren invited me for coffee and told me Ethan had moved into his own apartment. He and Diane had finally admitted they couldn't live together. Ironically, the future he'd defended so fiercely had lasted only a few months before collapsing under its own weight. Before we left, Lauren hesitated. He told me something. What was it? He said losing the house wasn't the hardest part. Realizing you'd stopped believing in him was. For the first time since everything happened, I hoped he truly understood what he'd lost. Not because I wanted him back, but because people rarely change until they're forced to face the consequences of their own choices. I never heard from Diane again. The angry messages stopped, people eventually moved on, and so did I. One evening, several months later, I came home from work, unlocked my apartment, and stood quietly in the doorway. Warm afternoon light filled the living room. Mia's photo rested on the bookshelf. My grandmother's earrings were safely tucked away in the bedroom, and the lease bearing my name sat neatly inside a filing cabinet. Looking around, I realized starting over at 28 had never been the tragedy. The real tragedy would have been spending the rest of my life asking someone to treat me like an equal. I set my keys on the counter and looked around one last time. For the first time in years, nobody could tell me to leave, because this time, every key in my pocket opened a door that belonged to me.